Welcome to the number 13 in the lecture series on legal and governance aspects, and this one we will discuss public organizations. In this micro lecture we will discuss the basic characteristics of public organizations. Most of you will be working in private organizations in the future, but you will always meet public organizations and they will influence your work. So it's good to understand what they do and how they are similar, but also how they are different from private organizations. If you haven't done that yet, watch number 2 on organizations first, because that gives you the basic characteristics of organizations as such, and you will better understand how public organizations will be different. Now, a first specific characteristic of public organizations is that they have specific goals or missions. They are there to represent the general or the public interests. That's what makes them public organizations. Private organizations can focus on their own interests, but public organizations, they have to focus on the general interest. They have to represent the interests of the entire nation if they are on national level. Of course, if they are a municipality on local level, they have to represent the interests of the municipality as a whole. And this means that they have to represent the interests of all citizens and organizations in their area. They have to represent them equally, they have to treat them equally, and they can also be if they do this in a non-selective way. They can't say we select only a part of the population. No, they have to represent every interest that is there. They cannot refuse severe claims from specific interests that are there. And the result of this all is that there are usually goal conflicts. Goal conflicts are a normal situation for public organizations. And that relates to the fact that different citizens, different organizations, can have different interests. And they might be conflicting, and they cannot choose between them, but they have to represent the interests of all. Now, to illustrate this idea of goal conflict, it's good to look at a specific example. In the city where I live, Enschede, we have a famous beer factory where they brew the Grolsch beer. And on the bottom you see the new factory, but on top the old factory that was located inside the city of Enschede. And it was located in the area where in the year 2000 a major fireworks explosion took place. And there was a real danger that in this fireworks explosion the ammonia tanks that were in the factory would have exploded, and if that would have been the case, then it would have been a major disaster, killing thousands of people. Now, if you want to protect people, it's good to ask the question how you should construct a building where all these ammonia tanks are located. And of course, if you want to protect the people that live outside, you want a building that is very strong, so in case something goes wrong, the dangerous stuff is kept within the building and the people outside are protected. Now, of course, there are also people working in the factory. They are inside the building. So in order to protect them, it's important to have certain weak spots in the building so that in case anything goes wrong, the dangerous substance is blown out of the building as soon as possible in order to protect those people that are inside. Now, of course, if you want to protect the interests of all people, you are faced with a problem. So for the people outside, you want a strong building. For the people inside, you want a building with weak spots. And the difficulty with public organizations is that they have to protect the interests of both types of citizens. They can't say, well, there's more people living outside, so it's a pity for those working inside. And we choose for those that live outside. No, you have to find a solution that will be able to protect the interests of both types of citizens, both outside and inside. And that's why it's very difficult for public organizations to find solutions. Now, a second characteristic of public organizations is that they take decisions in a political way. There is political decision making, and that's related to the fact that we live in democratic systems. So every 4 year, participants are selected and elected by all citizens, and these participants that get elected, they are involved in final decision making. And these elections are, of course, based on party systems, and these parties represent different visions on how to organize the country, and they are related to different ideologies. People have different ideas of what's the best way of organizing our societies. And the final decision making is, of course, guided by majority rule. The majority decides what's going to be done. Now, in many countries, after elections, there is one specific party that is in power, and it's rather easy for them to take decisions. But in a country like the Netherlands, we always have many different parties that are represented in parliament, and they have to form coalitions. They have to work together in order to find a majority, and that implies that they have to compromise about their decisions. So this means that there will always be lots of discussions on what to do based on the different ideologies that parties have. And all this discussion on decision making is motivated in public. There's always public discussion on decisions that have to be made, why they are made, and of course that includes lots of media attention. And all this is done because we want politicians that take decisions to be able to hold them accountable. Accountable through parliament, but also, of course, accountable through elections. We want to know what they do in order to be able to send them away at the next election if we are not satisfied with how they do things. And of course, all of this implies that there is not only a conflict because there are different interests of citizens, but there is also lots of conflict because people have different ideas on what are the best decisions to take. Decision making in public organizations is not only guided by political decision making, but it's also happening in a context where legal rules are very important, and the idea of rationality is very important. Legal rules and legal procedures are important for everyone, for every organization. Of course, that's why we study them in this course. That's why we pay so much attention to the legal aspects in the construction sector. But they are even more important for the public organizations that use them. They themselves are guided by the legal procedures, and they are very important in their functioning and how they take decisions. And what these legal procedures do is mainly two things. They specify how decisions are to be made to make sure that the common interest is taken care of. We discussed this. But this is also related to the fact that they stress the fact that rational decision making should take place. Rationality in this case means that you really have to find the best solutions for everyone, and that these best solutions are based on expert knowledge. So a governmental organization cannot take a decision because they think, well, this might be a good idea, let's give it a try. No, they really have to investigate all options, and they have to use expert knowledge and base their decisions on that knowledge. This idea of rationality is linked to the situation that governments are very powerful. We've given them the opportunity to take decisions for all of us, to take final decisions, to base rules and regulations on those decisions, and also, of course, to make sure that we all live by these rules and regulations. Now, if someone is given a powerful position, that also brings a higher responsibility. The idea of a powerful actor as a kind of Superman organization brings with it the fact that we all expect the government to act really well and to be really rational. If something goes wrong in a society, usually always people start looking at governmental organizations that were supposed to protect us. Where was government when something went wrong? So governments are held responsible, they are held accountable, and of course in the legal sense this is also related to the fact that they might be liable in case of something goes wrong. Now, these standards are really very strict. It's very difficult to meet all these standards, both in terms of all the legal procedures, there are so many and they might be conflicting, and also in terms of rationality. But if public organizations fail to meet these standards, they result in either legal or political suicide. If you don't follow legal rules and someone takes you to court, then judges will indicate that public organizations have to take different decisions. If something goes wrong and interests of people are not well protected, then that will be usually political suicide, because if we as citizens are not satisfied with how public organizations work, we will send the politicians home at the next elections. Public organizations are also known for the specific organizational form and their use of budget mechanisms in order to allocate the money that they have to work with. Work in public organizations is usually divided over policy fields, and each policy field has specific organization, department, and those departments have units and subunits. So for instance, we have on a national level, we have a department for infrastructure, a department for economic development, for environmental policy, for educational policies, for health policies, and the like. Now, of course, all these different departments, they hire specific expertise that is related to the policy field. And these departments have specific competences, they have specific task areas where they can do their work. They have, and of course this is just like in any other organization, but they also not only have a specific administration top management level, they are also guided by political leaders, and these political leaders are specifically linked to those organizations. So for instance, you have a minister for environmental development, or environmental protection, for economic development, for education, and the like. And of course these political leaders, they all have their own ideas and sometimes different ideologies that they represent. So they are not only working for the entire public organizations, but also specifically for their own departments. Now, of course, the money that they use for all their work is collected by taxation, and this implies that they have yearly budgets that are fixed, and these budgets are of course allocated in a yearly budget plan that is decided by government and has to go through parliament, and this implies that there is always competition over those budgets. There's a fixed total amount of money that is available for all governmental organizations, so all departments. If budgets are set for the educational department, they are no longer available for other departments. So departments, and of course their political leaders, they fight over budgets that they need. They might fight over the competences that they have. They might fight over who has the ability to decide about what. And of course they will also fight about the policy decisions that have to be made in this context. If we combine all these things, we see governmental or public organization as special actors. The state as an organization has to represent the public, the common interest. They have to solve collective problems and the conflicts that come with them. They have to take decisions by democratic rule and political compromise. They themselves they are subject to legal rules and the procedures that come with it. They fight over limited budgets, but they are held publicly accountable if they don't do things in a rational way. To illustrate how this is different from life in a normal or a private organization, it's good to imagine a specific construction firm. A construction firm where decisions are taken collectively, not only by a specific board, but by representatives of architects, the constructors themselves, subcontractors, employers that work for them, future users of the buildings that they make, future neighbors of those buildings, interest organizations, and all this collective decision making. They are made accountable for their decisions, all the actors that are involved in it, not only to their own groups that they represent, but also to the idea of the general public or the common interest. And to make things complete, this is done in a regional monopoly, so you are the only construction firm in that region, but the money that you get is also set by a fixed budget. So you can imagine that this is an entirely different situation than the situation where a private construction firm is normally find themselves involved in. Okay, let's wrap things up. In this micro lecture we discussed some basic characteristics of public organizations. Of course, they are similar to all organizations, they are part of them, but they have some specific characteristics that influence what they do and how they do their work. And I hope that this helps you in understanding why some of the things that public organizations do seem so difficult to understand, why they are so involved in following all the legal procedures that they have to take care of, why it seems so bureaucratic, why things sometimes seem so irrational in terms of the fact that things are made in a political way, and why sometimes the actions of public organizations seem so contradictory. And in many cases this has to do with the different conflicting interests that they really have to represent.